Anycubic was nice enough to send over their new Kobra S1 combo kit, so let's check it out and see how it performs. The box did get a little damaged in chipping, but it looks like this is packed well enough that didn't really matter, seeing that it has some really thick foam on top and bottom. And with all that padding off, it looks like there's no damage to the actual machine. Also, check out this interesting folding screen that it comes with. But anyways, there's more inside the machine that we still need to unpack. And removing this panel, you can see how packed everything is in here. And there's instructions on how to remove everything. And let me flip this over to the English side. So we're going to need some tools that were supplied with the machine. And it's nothing too crazy, just remove the 2 screws that have the arrows pointing to them using the supplied Allen keys. And then I was able to just pull this directly out of the top of the machine. And if we take a look inside the machine, there's still a box and some other padding. And this box pretty much has all the odds and ends to get this whole thing set up. On top of that, it comes with a USB drive that has all the software needed to run this machine from your computer and some test files. And here's a quick look at everything out of the box. And I did already remove the plastic piece that was covering this up, and I had to remove a screw from each one of these red arrows. And some of these actually held the build plate down as well. So it's really important to get all of them. Also, the print head is kind of locked in place with a zip tie and some cardboard. And getting everything free is pretty straightforward. Just cut the zip tie, remove the cardboard, and make sure to unhook the zip tie from the back of the machine. Definitely a lot easier said than done with only one hand and recording, but I eventually got it. With all the packing stuff removed, I can actually start setting this up, and I'm actually going for the single filament option first to make sure everything's running properly. And to do this, all I have to do is install the spool holder, using just 2 screws. And that way I can just put a spool of filament on here and feed it directly into the machine, all the way up to the print head. There is a small vent at the back of the printer that you can open up and put in some activated charcoal, and this pretty much acts as filtration, and they do provide a bag with this setup. But keep in mind you'll have to change this out sometime in the future. And like most 3D printers nowadays, it has a magnetic removable build plate, and this is coated on both sides with a textured PEI. And you can safely print PLA, ABS, PETG, and ASA on this. It also has 2 notches at the top of it that line up with the machine, making sure that you get this in the right way every time. Let's get this plugged in, turned on, and set up for the first time. And it does take about 30 seconds to boot up, and then it's going to ask you what language you want it to be in and to connect to Wi-Fi. But you can skip the Wi-Fi part if you want to, along with a cloud setup that can also be skipped. But this next part is actually important, and you shouldn't skip it, because it's going to go through and calibrate everything. Also at this point, it wants you to plug in your USB drive, and the port is located right here on the side. With that all done and pushing next, the machine's going to go through and do all of its calibrations, and this takes about 10 to 15 minutes. And keep in mind, the placement of the machine is kind of important. You want to make sure to put it onto a sturdy surface, because even though it can do compensation for the vibrations and movement, it can only do so much. But anyways, once the machine is done, it will prompt you to be finished, and now the machine is completely usable. And this touchscreen is pretty much how you control everything on this printer. And if I go to the start printing option and local, there's already some files on here that I can print. And if I go back and go to the U-Disk option, you can print things directly from the USB drive. And if you do it this way, you could basically never have the machine connected to the internet. And speaking of that, I'm actually going to print something off of the USB drive, which should be really important and useful if you're going to be using any cardboard spools, because they don't really like to work inside the multi-filament unit without slipping and causing problems. That's where these little ring things come in really handy. And it is nice that they include the files for this with the printer itself. With that being said, they're completely useless for all the spools that I have because they're too small. Oddly enough, it does fit on the plastic spool that comes with the printer, but it shouldn't be needed for this. But honestly, not really that big of a problem, and I was able to find a file for this online and print it out that fit perfectly. So your usage on that file might vary, and a lot of my spools of filament are kind of old, so sizes might have changed over time. But you do need to print at least 2 of these per spool, and they can be removed so they're reusable. And with the settings I used, they take about half an hour to print each. I did also print both of the Benchy Boat files that were provided on this printer. One of them is a 15-minute print, the other is a 45-minute, so we can see the difference between speed and quality printing. Here's a look at the 15-minute one, which if you look at it, you can tell that it's a little droopy in spots, and you could definitely tell this was printed quickly, at probably the lowest resolution possible. But it was completely successful, and this quality and speed would be perfectly fine for rapid prototyping. When you put it next to the 45-minute one, you can see the dramatic difference in quality. You can see that the lines are a lot more crisp, and there's a lot less ghosting. If you look at the window on the 15-minute one, you can see that the top of it's kind of drooping down, and the 45-minute one is completely square. And you could definitely see other quality problems if you compare them side by side like this. That being said, the 45-minute one isn't perfect, especially when you look at the seam line on the back right here, and it looks like it has a little bit of a retraction problem. But overall, everything is working as you can see, so I'm going to move my attention over to the multi-material setup that they're calling the ACE Pro. And surprisingly, this is capable of doing a few different things. But I do feel like one of its main uses is being able to hold 4 different types of materials in it at once and giving you access to them for printing. Like I talked about before, you can use cardboard spools as long as you print these little rings for them, and just about any 1 kilogram plastic spool should work in here as well, without any modification. One feature that I find extremely helpful is being able to use up all the extra material I have left on these rolls. Because I do a lot of printing using the same exact material, so I end up with spools that don't have enough material to make anything on them. So with this setup, I can use the filament backup, and once a roll runs out, it switches to the next one. And it does have a few more tricks up its sleeve, but let's get it actually set up on the printer first. I'm going to have to remove that filament I had on the back, along with putting the top panel back on. I also need to install this and plug it in, and this is pretty much going to be attached to all 4 filaments, and allow a single one to go through to the print head. And it's attached to the machine just using 2 screws. From there, I just take the top tube and plug it into it, making sure that it's locked in place, and plug in the electrical connection to it to the machine itself. I'm going to be putting this on top of the machine, but you could technically put it next to it as well. And this also has a data connection cable that needs to be plugged into it and to the machine itself. You can also technically chain 2 of these together and have up to 8 different filaments being fed into one machine. But I'm not going to be doing that in this video, seeing that I only have one of these. But I do need to install these 4 tubes into the back of it, which really isn't that hard to do, but getting these little blue things off to actually plug in stuff is a little more difficult. And I found using some sharp tweezers, I was able to pull these out, and it made it so much easier to pull the blue things off. And I'm sure there's a better way of doing this, but this is what worked for me at the time, and I didn't damage anything in the process. And then all you have to do is plug the tube in and reinstall that blue lock, and repeat this process for all of them. And from there, all the tubes just plug in here, and the last thing that needs to be plugged in is a secondary power cord, because both units need their own power. And with everything all turned on, I can start loading it up with filament. And it will detect when you put your filament into it, and as soon as you feel the gears grab it, you can let go. And you don't have to fill this up with filament if you don't want to, you can just have one roll in here. But I am going to see how it works with everything filled up. And before even printing anything using this, I did run into a problem. And it's because this purple roll of filament has too much on it, so when I close this, it doesn't allow it to move. So I had to swap it out for something else, and I had no problem switching between single colors for printing, and honestly it's pretty nice not having to worry about swapping out your rolls when you want to change a different color or material. One other thing that ACE Pro can do is actually dry out your filaments, and that's pretty much why it's plugged into its own power source, and it's able to do this while you're printing at the same time. And back to another feature of the printer itself, because it has a built-in camera, it's able to monitor your prints, and if it fails, it will pause your print and let you know. So I started a print that I thought would fail, and it did eventually, and I got a notification on my phone from the app that I installed for this, and yeah, as you can see, it did fail, and the machine was able to catch that pretty quickly. And I'm happy to see that it worked as well as it did, especially having printers in the past fail on me at some point, and I didn't know about it until about 8 hours later, and wasted a ton of filament. You can also view this camera through the app or the slicer, and see what's going on live, or you can have it do a time lapse like I'm showing in this video. And it actually did a really good job printing out this brown matte material. And even though I forgot to flip this thing over in the slicer, it was able to print the top of this, even though it was printing in midair at some points, and there is some stringiness on the inside I'm going to have to cut out. But I did print a different style in the correct orientation, using a 3-color silk PLA, and it looked like it was doing a decent job while printing, and I like how this material looks as you go around the object and it changes color. That being said, it didn't come out perfect, and you can see some artifacts around here, along with a bit of stringing, and it has some gaps where it was printing directly on the bed. There's also this weird spot on one of the handles where it looks like it was going to fail at one point, and then it fixed itself, because if you look at the other side, it's completely fine. But we've seen what single color can do, let's try out some multicolor with this printer. And honestly, for the most part, I don't typically use multicolor printing, because most of the time it's just for aesthetics of whatever you're making, and I'm usually only printing functional prints. On top of that, it dramatically slows down how fast your print is going, and depending on how many colors and where all the colors are located, you might be switching your colors every layer. But as you can see, it does do a good job at it, besides having a little bit of stringing going on. And there's a bit of bumpiness or a weird texture right here. And you can see a bit more of the stringing as I'm closer to this. But the overall color mixing of this was really good, and you can't see any black in the gold or vice versa. Another thing to keep in mind with the multicolor prints is the waste, because every time it changes filament, it has to purge filament out. And this is all the waste from this one print. And if I throw all of this onto a scale, you can see how much it weighs. And then if we compare that to the actual printed object, you can see that the waste is almost as much as the actual print. That being said, this is is worst case scenario because it was changing every layer. So if you set it up in a way that it's only printing on a few layers, there's a lot less waste. Basically like what I did with this multi-piece case, which as you can see came out looking pretty good, but there are some problems still. Like this point on the back that for some reason failed, or just didn't stick properly. And if you look at just the multicolor part of this, it has colors on the outside and inside, but there's some spots that got a little mixed with the colors, and the surface finish on the inside isn't great. And so far with all my printing, I've been just having random errors in every print pretty much. And I'm using the same default settings for everything from the slicer, and I'm getting different results every time. And this gold part was printed separately, so it doesn't really count in what I'm talking about, but it has been able to print just about anything I've thrown at it so far. And I just wanted to make sure you knew about all the random defects I've been getting. And in case you're wondering, the slicer software is up to date, along with the firmware on the printer, and all calibrations have been done after updating. And I did want to compare a simple print using the same material, using a Bambu Lab P1P versus this printer. And right away you can see a problem with the P1P print, and you can see that it's really rough and stringy in this one part. And you don't see anything like that from the print from the Kobra S1. But instead it does have some under extrusion where the seam line would be, which you can see right there on the edge. And overall the rest of the print looks pretty good, with a little bit of texturing going on that's not supposed to be there, but at the same time silk filament will show off every possible flaw. But the Kobra does have a lot of really fine stringing on every print pretty much, and on the bottom it looks like some filament from the last print got in here. But overall, this is one of the better first layers I've seen from the machine, without any gaps going on. And if we take a closer look at the one printed on the P1P, it also has an artifacting problem going on the outside of it as well, but it looks a little bit worse, but honestly nothing that's going to really affect anything. And the first layer on this one came out just as good as the Kobra, but if we take a look on the inside, it doesn't have any stringing going on. And it is a little weird to me that the Kobra is having problems with very simple prints. And I'm sure all of this can be fixed with a little bit of tuning in the settings, but at this point, with how these printers are set up nowadays, that shouldn't be something you would have to worry about, along with that entire aspect getting harder and harder to do. But if you don't mind tinkering with settings, then this won't be a problem for you. But even with these defects, all my prints have been at least accurate. And as an example, I made these sleeves to fit onto the mini discs that I have, and then the sleeves will fit into the holder. And nothing is too tight or too loose. I even have a retail case that fits in here perfectly. So like I said, accuracy is definitely not a problem. And I feel like this printer is about 85% of the way there to pretty much be plug and print. It's just that little bit of tuning that needs to be done to make it perfect. And even though I am pointing out these problems, I do think it is a pretty good setup, and it was easy to use. Along with that, it seems like it has a pretty robust design that should be able to hold up and last for quite a while. And it has a lot of helpful smart features that most printers nowadays have built into them, along with being fully enclosed so you can print hotter materials, especially with your 320 Celsius hot end, paired up with a ceramic heat break, so you shouldn't get any type of clogs from thermal creep in that area. And depending on what your needs are, you can go with the Kobra S1 combo in 4 or 8 colors, or you can just get the single color Kobra S1. And at the time of recording this, the 4 color combo kit is about $600, and if you wanted to move up to the 8 color option, it's about $880. But if the multicolor thing isn't for you, you can get the Kobra S1 for $450. And I honestly think these price points are pretty good for what you're getting, and I believe their direct competition is the Bambu Lab P1S, seeing that that printer is about $870 with the 4 color setup, and $550 for the single color. But like always, it's going to be up to you what printer you go with, and whatever one you do end up going with, let me know in the comments, because I'm actually interested in knowing what people are buying. And I'll have links to everything I talked about in this video in the description and first pinned comment. Well, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!